Thanks for joining the certification course, the transition between what used to be the old Good Practice Guidelines 2018 and the new Good Practice Guidelines edition 7.0. My name is Paul Breed. I'll be taking you through today's session and go through the slide deck together with my colleague Smita from the BCI. If you do have any questions, please, could I encourage you just use the Q&A session rather than the chat box so that those can be picked up, and we'll try to address those towards the end of the session. So the next slide, just giving you a brief overview in relation to general housekeeping. All I'd ask is that if you could keep your outgoing audio on mute, just in case we do get any distortion. And if you do have any questions, as I say, please use the Q&A session, and we can pick up on those either as we go through the session or towards the end of the session itself. As you probably identified, that the webinar's there to last probably about 60 minutes, whether it actually does. The slide deck is really reasonably short and succinct, but please ask those searching questions of myself, who's been involved in this process together with Smita to try to get the course together to reflect the new Good Practice Guidelines. We'll introduce ourselves as well on the next couple of slides, and then we'll go into the main slide deck and then finish off with the Q&A session. So the agenda for today, just to bring you up to speed, one, to explain the new course and the content, and some of it may well seem quite simplistic in the sense of what we're actually hoping to achieve by doing that transition to the new Good Practice Guidelines. I'll describe the key changes, the main high-level events that, if you've had an opportunity to read the Good Practice Guidelines to date, you'll identify that there are some subtle changes, but equally there are some big-ticket event changes in the Good Practice Guidelines as well. The third point, that high-level overview of the 6 professional practices. As we'll go through, we've probably identified already that some of the terms used within the Good Practice Guidelines, especially the names of the 6 professional practices, some of which have changed. So that's a subtle difference, and we'll talk about those as we go through the session. And then lastly, we'll talk about the new CBCI exam and the BCI membership, and hopefully Smita will be able to come in there and expand on that in relation to what that actually looks and feels like to reflect the new Good Practice Guidelines. So I'll introduce my colleague Smita and ask her to come in as well. If you want to go first, Smita, and then I'll just talk about myself briefly.
Sure, thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. Good to see you here. I am Samhita Ganguly. I'm the Acting Head of Learning at the BCI. I've been with the BCI for about 6 years, most of it being in the training and education team, which is now called the learning team. Our team looks after development of training content, so we have been heavily involved in the development of the new GPG, the new CBCI course, the new CBCI exam, the 1 and 2 day specialism courses, the e-learning courses, translations. So that's the sort of thing that the team does, that the learning team takes care of, apart from managing the delivery and administration of all the training courses and materials that we have. Thank you. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Smita. As you can see myself there, Paul Breed. I've been involved with the BCI probably since about 2014 in greater earnest, where I became involved as an instructor, as a trainer, and then working with different organisations and different post-secondary institutes, higher education in relation to delivering the courses, and then being part of in relation to either the CBCI course, various other courses as well, to try to bring together the learning that we had in 2018 GPG, together with those lessons that we've identified from the pandemic and other supply chain issues, and then being a part of the working team to develop the new Good Practice Guidelines and then transition that into the CBCI course itself. So quite a lot of knowledge and experience coming across to try to pull things together to reflect current Good Practice Guidelines in relation to business continuity. So going into the main body of the presentation. So the new course and the content, some key points just to bring to your attention really. And as I say, if you've had a chance to have a look at the new Good Practice Guidelines, you will see some subtle changes. So The course itself is there to provide the knowledge and understanding about business continuity and reflects the new edition 7.0 as the core textbook. So very similar in format. If you pick up the Good Practice Guidelines 2018 and the Good Practice Guidelines 7.0, on the face of it, both look very similar, but there are subtle differences. The second point to make is that the activities in the course are deliberately generic. So they're generic in nature to accommodate students from different geographical locations, different industries. So it's not one size fits everything. It's a generic document, much the same as what the 2018 edition was. However, I think you'll find within the 7.0 edition that it gives you greater flexibility in the interpretation of, looking at, say, for example, Professional Practice 2, which is now called Embracing Business Continuity rather than Embedding BC. And we talk more about the culture of the organization, the culture of business continuity, and how we can improve indicators and measures around the BC culture. So there's, I would suggest, softer skills associated with some of the 6 professional practices. The third point is that the program obviously consists of the 6 professional practices based on the GPG itself. And I'll talk about the separate identities and the names and the terms used for those 6 professional practices, and just give you that high-level overview of why those principles, why those modules have changed the names, i.e. from going from embedding BC to now embracing business continuity. On the bottom left-hand corner of this slide, you see that students are expected to familiarise themselves with the CBCI qualifications before the start of the course. What we're actually hoping is that students would have that opportunity in advance to look at the Good Practice Guidelines. So instead of turning up at the course with no knowledge of the GPG, ideally they've spent some time to go through the GPG to understand the concept and start to understand business continuity, so that we can maximise that opportunity when we come to the course itself. So that's quite heavily emphasised when the joining instructions go out, so that students have got that knowledge and baseline understanding of reading the GPG prior to the start of the course. And then at the bottom centre, the CBCI qualifications specification clearly states that the required learning time of 61.5 hours, including the 90-minute exam. So that's a collective in relation to pre-learning or pre-reading, the course itself, and then the 90-minute exam itself. And the 90-minute exam we'll talk about at the end of the session, because it is slightly different to what the old qualification used to be, about 120 questions within 2 hours, unless English wasn't your first language, where you could ask for an additional 30 minutes. So we'll talk about that towards the latter part of the course. And then the final element is that the CBCI 7.0 course, ideally, it should be delivered over 3 days, but it may well be extended depending on the licensed training partners. But ideally, we could do that within 3 days, and purely on the basis that we've cut out some of the additional information that we had on the previous CBCI course. So it is achievable to deliver the course itself within 3 full days. And if you look at the online course, slightly different. It used to be over 8 weeks, is now being condensed into 6 weeks. But the content is exactly the same in the sense of we've gone through the GPG, and there's probably more dialogue with student engagement around certain elements about those softer skills. So that's a very brief high-level overview about the course itself, which we'll dissect even further as we go through today's session. So the Good Practice Guidelines itself, it's still the definitive guide in relation to good practice around business continuity. It describes the 6 professional practices of the business continuity management system itself. The CBCI qualification lays out the syllabus for that CBCI exam 7.0, and passing the exam leads to that international recognised CBCI qualification and entry to the CBCI grade of membership. From this diagram, you probably think that it looks very similar to the Good Practice Guidelines 2018. What I will suggest is that it's only when you look at that diagram itself, you'll find that the term the life cycle has been removed, as has, at the bottom of the old Good Practice Guidelines, they used to say to achieve organisation resilience. We'll see that there's subtle differences within that diagram itself. So although we've got a circular diagram, the terminology used within that initial front cover is slightly different, and that's reflected within the 6 practice guidelines. So the next slide talks about the good practice guidelines, some very high level elements. So it talks about that the latest edition of the GPG encompasses progressive evolution of the BCM as a discipline. And they will talk about the term, the BCMS, the Business Continuity Management System, as the realization of business continuity management. So the term the life cycle has been removed and has now been replaced by the Business Continuity Management System. The second point, it talks about incorporates updated processes and terminologies that have entered or evolved within the BC lexicon. So the glossary terms on pages 12, 13, 14 and 15, I think, since the last review. So there's greater terminology being used, and that's reflective of what we've learned from post-pandemic, together with other good practices and the input from international individuals around business continuity. And in addition to that, the BCMS has replaced that term, the life cycle. So again, it's very easy, certainly when I'm delivering courses, I do fall into the habit, occasionally I use the term the life cycle. It's just the fact that the life cycle is now being replaced by the term business continuity management system. It doesn't roll off the tongue as easy, I must admit, but as soon as you get into that framework, you'll see what the BCMS is actually hoping to achieve. So as we go through the GPG as well, you'll see that perhaps with the GPG 2018, there was very much an emphasis about the technical standards in relation to good practice guidelines or the implementation of business continuity. You'll see the subtle differences within the new edition 7.0. Those aligned to the international standards, there are softer skills. So as I say, when we look at professional practice 2, for example, we're really talking about the softer skills of that BC professional around negotiation, about being able to have that conversation with individuals and address those challenges. So instead of trying to use the carrot and stick approach in relation to trying to embed business continuity, we try to embrace people to bring them on that journey. So the heads and hearts to bring them on that journey of successfully embedding BC within the organization. So there is a subtle difference about the softer skills required of that BC professional, about general management skills and negotiation. However, we are reliant on the international standards. So the ISO standard 22301 2019 edition specifies requirements for the BCMS. Hence, that's why the GPG has been updated as well. Those links are interwoven within the professional practices. Again, you may have to search for those subtle differences, but they are actually there. The GPG is as prescriptive as possible about implementing the BCMS. So that's there to try to reflect the international standard. However, it does give the end user, the reader, the flexibility and adaptability so that you can interpret that prescriptive methods to make sure that it's bespoke for your organization. So again, where it is prescriptive, we try to follow that system. However, it gives you the flexibility to interpret that bespoke to your organization. And then the final point, demonstrating knowledge and understanding of the 6 professional practices. It's all scalable as it used to be within the GPG 2018. So it's all sequential, and we all bring it together to do that double loop learning in relation to the validation process that links us back to professional practice 1 about establishing a business continuity management system. So very similar, but subtle differences, and certainly in some of the content itself. And the next slide just gives you an idea of how the Good Practice Guidelines has used the ISO standards as well as the GPG to interpret that softer understanding of how we can apply those technical aspects. So on this slide, this is taken from page 9 of the GPG, that it just highlights that whereas before we didn't have a diagram in relation to an event or an incident will actually start, then it results in one of the following, whether it be a crisis, disruption or emergency. Some could argue it goes on to a disaster or catastrophe, but how we bring all of that together in the interpretation of the business continuity management system and how we can see that integrated approach that brings it together so that we can use the ISO standard and the good practice guidelines and wider disciplines within the organization to suddenly bring it all together, as opposed to perhaps previously working in isolation as business continuity as a discipline. So hopefully you'll see that as you go through the GPG itself. So moving on to the business continuity management system. So if I can take you back to the life cycle used to be that circular diagram And on the outer ring, we used to have professional practice 1, policy and program management. That's now being changed to the term establishing a business continuity management system, which we will break down on the next slide. However, we still have 2 management practices. So the management practices are professional practice 1 and professional practice 2. So professional practice 1, the new term is known as establishing a business continuity management system, and professional practice 2, embracing business continuity. And again, I'll break those down on the next slides. The technical practices still remain as 4 technical practices, but the terms and the titles of those technical practices have changed. PP3 analysis remains as it is. However, professional practice 4 has now changed to the term solutions design, whereas before, the 6 professional practices used to be professional practice 1, policy and program management, followed by embedding BC, followed by analysis, followed by design, implementation, and validation. So professional practice 4, solutions design, and professional practice 5, enabling solutions. So how do you enable the solutions to be brought into the B, the incident response plans, the BC plans of the organization? And then professional practice 6 remains very similar to what it did do on GPG 2018, apart from one subtle difference, which I'll identify as we go through the slide deck. So those are the titles, but all I would emphasize is that we've still got 2 management practices supported by 4 technical practices, and you can equally apply that within that circular diagram, that establishing BCMS remains on the outer ring, i.e. keeping that wheel moving. Embracing BC is still that center axle that keeps that wheel moving together, supported by the technical practices, analysis, solutions design, enabling solutions, and validation. So again, very similar to what we had previously, but subtle differences in the titles themselves. So moving on to establishing a BCMS. So as you read the Good Practice Guidelines 7.0, you'll find within this chapter that it outlines how the BCMS should be designed and implemented, very similar to what was in the 2018 edition. And it also goes on to talk about the policy, the governance process to maintain a BCMS through the ongoing cycle of activities. The subtle differences I would suggest within professional practice 1, clearly the title is different. As you read professional practice 1, you'll find that clearly the life cycle is no longer in existence, and we use the term business continuity management system, which follows what the ISO standard actually suggests. You'll find that scope now goes before policy within the GPG, so that scope is there to obviously identify what should be included or excluded, but as opposed to the 2018 edition, we had policy prior to scope. They've now introduced scope prior to policy. There should be 2 separate entities, but scope obviously feeds into the policy itself. They're going to talk about governance. Governance very similar to as it was previously, and then they talk about leadership and roles and responsibilities. However, what you don't find is a bespoke element, predominantly which was within GPG 2018, pages 24, 25, is that they don't specifically introduce the BC program per se. That's encapsulated within the wider BCMS process itself. So subtle differences that it's only until you read professional practice 1 and then reread it, you can see the similarities, but also you can see the subtle differences that have been applied to professional practice 1. So that's why I would suggest that the course captures those subtle differences to highlight those, to bring them to your attention, because it's quite easy on occasion to read professional practice 1 and then come away and think, yeah, what's really changed? There are subtle differences that we just need to capture. And I would suggest that the new GPG 7.0 is perhaps more flexible in the interpretation of how you can establish a BCMS to make it bespoke for your organization. As opposed to, in the old Good Practice Guidelines, page 25, there was a healthy bulleted list there in relation to what the documentation you should consider or what you should have within your BC program. Those lengthy lists have been removed from professional practice 1, so it allows you that flexibility to apply that in a meaningful way to your organization. Moving on to good old professional practice 2. So this is probably one of the bigger changes in the GPG. So previously known as embedding business continuity, now changed that to embracing business continuity. So it talks about highlighting the importance of embracing BC. And embracing BC is designed to deliver the outcomes that are the product of the organisation with a strong BC culture. It goes on to talk about individuals and teams have a deeper and more empathetic understanding of business continuity management system and the belief that BC is a core function. And wrap that, in essence, what they're actually suggesting is that the term embedding was probably historically based on, we have a policy, the policy says that we must do this, but instead of going through that tick box, checkbox culture in relation to, yes, this is what the policy actually says, we've done it, we're trying to change that embedding methodology to become more embracing within the organization. So it really does become a part of the culture of the organization, and that the buy-in is built in within the day-to-day activities. You find within that chapter that they talk about the differences between embedding and embracing. You'll also find within the chapter that they highlight certain key elements about understanding the existing organization culture, so the differences between different departments, different strategic, tactical, operational levels within the organization. But where the subtle change is, it becomes understanding the business continuity culture as opposed to just the existing organization culture. And they're then going to expand that in relation to certain key elements around subtleties, around how do we measure successful business continuity culture, what do those indicators actually look like, and by doing so, how can we improve the successful embracing of BC to become business as usual, to become the DNA of the organization. So there are similarities, there are subtle differences about that term embracing. So you've got the more softer skills, and certainly I was running a course yesterday about professional practice 2, and it certainly stimulated more dialogue from the delegates on the course rather than perhaps the old GPG that suggested this is how we should embed business continuity. There's more dialogue about the softer skills required of the BC professional to try to negotiate and manage upwards, as opposed to saying, yeah, this is what we should be doing. We understand the technical practices, but we need those subtle differences. So that's a big change in relation to professional practice 2, I would suggest. And that takes some reading again to understand exactly what they're suggesting and how you can interpret that within your own bespoke organisation. PP3, very similar, I would suggest, to as it was under the old Good Practice Guidelines 2018. There are some changes. They talk about the 2 technical aspects, i.e. the BC requirements, the good old business impact analysis. That really hasn't changed. And then they talk about the risk assessment process. So the BIA obviously estimates the impacts of disruption over time to determine the organisation's response, recovery priorities, and resource requirements. The subtle difference within the BIA process is that they've now reduced that to 3 BIA processes. So on the old GPG, we have the initial BIA followed by products and services, processes, and then activities. The initial BIA has now been removed as a title within the existing professional practice 3. So it only remains with product and services, processes, and activities. So that is a subtle difference. That doesn't mean that we have a steering group to establish, the BIA process itself, but the term, the initial BIA, has been removed. The remainder of the product and services, process, and activity BIA is very similar. You'll see that there are similarities to the old GPG, as is the risk assessment process. The risk assessment process comes at the latter part of that professional practice, very similar to what it was previously. But again, you'll find that the final consolidation, which used to be at the very final page of GPG 2018, has now been brought forward to sit between analysis and the risk assessment. And personally, I think that's the place that it should be, to bring that final analysis in relation to analysis before then moving on to the risk assessment process. So you probably see similarities on professional practice 3, more so than perhaps what you do with professional practice 2. So very similar as to what it used to be on the old GPG itself. Then, when we look at professional practice 4, there are some significant changes within professional practice 4, I would suggest. One, the title has changed. So it is now deemed to be solutions design. Clearly, the first point on this slide talks about that it is dependent on the outcomes of professional practice 3. So that hasn't changed in the sense of we take the findings, we take the findings on from the analysis, i.e. the recovery time objectives, etc. That then give us the timeframes in relation to identifying the most appropriate solutions and strategies for the organisation. It talks about that we need to undertake a gap analysis comparing capabilities to the BC requirements. So very similar to what we had previously in the sense of we need to understand where we are now as to where we want to get to and what does that gap assessment look like, especially if you're a mature organisation in relation to your good practice guidelines or your BC programme. They then talk about where gaps exist, organisations must define strategies and solutions. I think the subtle difference on professional practice 4 is the fact that in the old GPG, if we went to page 59, you saw 5 design strategies or solutions, starting off from diversification, replication, standby, post-incident acquisition, and then do nothing. So those 5 design solutions give you a time frame in relation to what you could apply within your own organisations. Those terms have now been removed from professional practice 4 in the new edition. So it gives you a greater degree of flexibility to interpret the design solutions, again, based on requirements such as, if you do have denial of access to your building, if you do have a loss of people in relation to your organisation, the way it's been presented within the new standard or the new GPG is slightly different to the old edition. So you need to interpret those based on solutions and strategies within your own organisation. And I would suggest that's probably one of the biggest changes within professional practice 4. You will see similarities though. So as you go through that process, very similar in certain terminology and design solutions. However, when you get to the latter part of professional practice 4, there are mitigation elements that used to be in the old GPG. However, I would suggest that they don't go in as much depth as what they did previously. So solutions design has changed. I would suggest not as much as professional practice 2, but it has changed and it does take some reading in relation to understanding what that actually looks and feels like compared to the old good practice guidelines 2018. And then moving on to professional practice 5, that enabling solution. So it used to be called implementation, very similar, I would suggest, in its structure, but there are some differences again. And again, on this slide, it talks about that we obviously take the outcomes from professional practice 4, we interpret that bespoke for your organizational needs and apply that within the organization itself. The second point talks about the solutions are supported by response structures and BC plans or business continuity plans. And then the resulting plans and processes are designed to be scalable and can be deployed in response to any incident type. So again, very similar to what was in the old GPG 2018, but you'll see some subtle differences in the sense of they talk about implementing BC solutions. They'll talk about designing the response structure as we did previously, and they also talk about the response plans themselves. If we talk about the response plans as or the BC plans previously, it used to be required to be direct, adaptable, concise, and relevant. They've now added 2 new elements into that design methodology. They talk about being unambiguous and they also talk about being verifiable. So 2 new elements added to the BC plan structure or the BC plan consideration. The rest of the main body around BC plans is very similar, talking about strategic levels, tactical, operational levels. There is greater emphasis on communication, I would suggest, and also that there's greater emphasis in certain elements around giving you examples around product recall elements. They talk about cyber incident response plans. They talk about infectious disease plans. They give you examples within that professional practice just for you to consider within your own organization as well. They also talk about between professional practice 4 and 5 around about coming back to business as usual and recovery strategies in relation to the wider picture. So I think those are the lessons learned from COVID-19 supply chain disruptions. So there are similarities as usual, but there are subtle differences. Again, you'll find professional practice 5 as a chapter is certainly longer than what it used to be within the 2018 edition. So again, we just need to be mindful about reading what Professional Practice 5 actually suggests. You will see similarities, but they've just been expanded from best practice that's taken place as a result, predominantly, I would suggest, about COVID-19 and reflecting the ISO standard 2019. It's a longer chapter for you to consider. But then when we come on to validation, is probably very similar to as it used to be within the GPG 2018. Yes, it talks about validation brings all the professional practices back together for that cohesion of your business continuity management system. It still maintains those three key elements about exercise, maintenance, and review. And it talks about, on the bottom part of this slide, the primary aim is to measure the competence of individuals, team cohesiveness, the quality of the BCMS process, and the effectiveness of the BC capability. Different words, I would suggest, but very similar to what used to be in Professional Practice 6 on the GPG 2018. I would suggest that one of the biggest differences, if you can recall the 2018 edition, when we looked at exercise maintenance and review, and the review process, there used to be 6 review types. So we used to talk about audit, self-assessment, quality assurance, performance appraisal, supplier performance, and management review. They've now added in post-incident review. So after action reports, post-incident review of either exercises or real events that can add value to your validation process. So they go from 6 to 7 types of review. So that's one of the subtle changes that may not be apparent until you actually drill down and then start studying the validation process itself. So there are subtle differences within validation, but I would suggest not as significant as what you'll find on Professional Practice 2, Professional Practice 4, and Professional Practice 5 itself. So that's a very brief summary. Mention the glossary terms. So the glossary terms on page 12, 13, 14, 15, they've been slightly expanded. On the old GPG, it used to be on page 10 and 11. So portrayed in a very similar way, but again, it's worth just having a look at those in relation to understanding some of the glossary terms, some of which have been taken from the GPG itself, some have been taken from the ISO standards, but they've been expanded in relation to the glossary terms found at the very start of the GPG 7.0. And then in summary, what we've actually got is that it's a refresh of what used to be the GPG 2018. It will provide you, or the course itself, the transition will provide you with a high-level overview of the changes which have happened. You'll probably see similarities between GPG 2018 and 2023. The biggest term I suggest is on point 2 here in relation to the BCMS as a terminology that now replaces the term BCMS lifecycle. So we talk about business continuity management system, and again, that takes some subconscious thinking in relation to what we talk about the business continuity management system as opposed to using the term the lifecycle itself. As I say, it doesn't roll off the tongue as easy, and on occasion I do fall back into using the term lifecycle and have to check myself, but I'm sure that's new, that will change over time. The third point that each professional practice is denoted as part of a never-ending series. So it's a set of projects, procedures, programs, depending on the size of the organization. And that's why business continuity has replaced the term the life cycle. So BCMS is the new terminology. And again, as a selling point for the BCI and for the course itself, we can find more information on the website and through the BCI itself. And that's where Samita's probably got far better knowledge about the BCI website, the information that's available to yourselves as delegates as you move forward if you decide to take on board that transition course. So that's enough from myself. I would suggest a very brief high-level overview of the new course and of the new GPG itself. If I could pass over to Samita, who may be able to add more volume in relation to BCI, etc.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much for taking us through the slides and giving us an overview of GPG 7.0 versus GPG 2018, and also the differences between the two courses. I think we can open the floor to answer the Q&As. I can see there are quite a few. So perhaps I can stop sharing and then we can take the question answers, if that's okay.
Yeah, Samita, I would keep the deck open for the slides, and I can select the questions and read them to you if you want.
Yeah, that'll be great. Thanks, Mariana.
Perfect. So one of the most asked questions that I saw popping up quite a few times is, so what do these changes to the course mean for people who took their exam in last month, or the CBCI 2018?
So it's for anybody who has taken a CBCI exam in the past and has successfully completed it, as a CBCI qualified person. What we have now is we are going to be launching this in February, is what we call the refresher course. So you could want to take the one-day refresher course, which would really upgrade your knowledge and understanding with relation to GPG 7.0. It does not affect your membership. You are not required to take a new exam. If you have only recently completed your CBCI, you're probably a CBCI member at the moment. Nothing with that changes. Anybody who has qualified CBCI 2018 is as much as CBCI member or higher grade member if you've upgraded, as someone who's going to go through the 7.0 journey. However, if you want to upgrade your knowledge and understanding of the new GPG via a course, we are going to be launching the one-day refresher course, which you can take to just for the sake of knowledge. It is a CPD opportunity for everybody, and there will be CPD points granted at the end of the course.
Thank you, Samita. One of the questions was concerning the amount of hours, of the course. So the question is, hi there, slide 5, in slide 5, it says 4 hours over 2 days per week. And for 6 weeks it does not equal 60 hours. So could you clarify, I think, yeah, if we can clarify the number of hours just to...
Yes, of course. So the CBCI qualification specifications, which have now also been published on the BCI website, actually state that the total learning time, including the 1.5 hour exam, is 61.5 hours. But as you will see in this slide, in the bottom middle slide point, it says that the learning time can also include attending the CBCI training course. So really what we mean to say is that you could do a 3 to 5 day course with one of our LTPs, or you could do the 6-week online course and study through that. All of that time, plus the self-study time that you will be giving to pre-read the GPG and even after your course, plus the exam time, all of that will add up to 61.5 hours.
Thank you, Samita. There's another question which is similar to the one before about membership and people who have already taken the CBCI exam. So the question is, for those that have already completed a CBCI course and exam, is there any expectation or requirement to retake the training course or the exam, as my CBCI certification expires in March 2024?
No, there is no such expectation and there is no such requirement at all. So there are two things to be mindful of here. There is the certification, which you do, you go through a course and then you take the exam and you get a certificate. And the validity of that certificate, which you get, is 3 years. However, when you qualify and become CBCI certified, the BCI offers you the first year of CBCI membership for free, and that begins your journey into the BCI membership. So the only thing that I will say to those who've asked this question is just be mindful that there is a qualification aspect and then there is a membership aspect, and they are two different things. However, there is no expectation from membership either that you have to retake your exam or reset a course. This is simply down to the individuals. If they want to upgrade their knowledge, they can take the refresher course. It isn't the 3 to 5 day course. It isn't the 6-week online course. If anybody just who has already qualified the CBCI and just wants to learn about the new CBCI 7.0 course, they can just take the 1-day refresher course, no exam at the end of it, and none of this is mandatory.
Thank you, Samita. So this one is a more of a technical one. So is ISO 22398 incorporated into the CBCI 7.0?
Paul, would you like to take that?
That's a good point. I'll have to go and check because I've got the list of the ISO standards here. Sorry, what was that number again? Let me see.
Sorry, 22398.
I've got 22313, 317, 301, 316, 318, 331, 332, 361, and 31,000 risk management. So did you say 22318?
22398.
No, I can't see that on my list. I've got 22318, but not 22398. But I will check. I can come back to you about that because it may well be included. It's just not included within my summary notes of what's on GPG itself.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. So there's another question. Can I just use the BCI GPG 7.0 to implement business continuity management in our organization, or do I also need to buy the ISO standards? What is your advice?
My advice would be depending on the organization itself, but certainly when I work with different organizations, I tend to use the good practice guidelines. That will give you a very comprehensive overview of how to apply business continuity within your organization in plain English, I would suggest, rather than going down that technical route. If the organization wishes to go for that ISO accreditation, clearly there's certain differences that the ISO requirement will be looking for in relation to achieving that qualification. So it depends on the needs of the organization, what the purpose context is in relation to the BC program, but certainly you can come away with a very good comprehensive application of business continuity by following the 6 professional practices.
Thank you, Paul, again. So there's another question. The glossary does not include a definition for an emergency, which appears in figure on page 9.
Yeah, that's a good point in the sense that the diagram that we talked about, I think on one of the slides, it goes from an instant and then it goes to an emergency incident crisis, I think. Yeah, that term emergency has not been included within the glossary terms. It never was within the 2018 edition, neither have the terms catastrophe or disaster. I can't give you an answer why it's been excluded, but certainly from my experience about the term emergency. So for example, the term emergency for those who work in the UK is slightly different to those who work in North America, Canada, to those that work in the Middle East. There's different definitions globally in relation to what is deemed to be an emergency. Now we could take that from perhaps the international standards. However, it never used to be in the old terminology of the glossary terms on page 1011 of 2018.
Thank you, Paul. Another question, has the CBCI exam structure changed?
Yes, it has. It is now a 90 questions, 90-minute exam, and the pass mark has changed as well. So all of the questions have a score of 1, and so out of 90, if you get 63, that's a pass mark, and 77 and above is pass with merit. It is still a multiple choice question answer exam, and every question has 4 options, out of which only 1 is correct.
Thank you, Samita. A question, oops, sorry, there's so many questions coming in. A question for Paul, does the course support operational resilience?
I think it does. It depends on the industry and the organization that's using operational resilience, because predominantly if you look at operational resilience, I would suggest most finance organizations are using that terminology. I've certainly used the GPG to assist in that process, as I used to use the Good Practice Guidelines 2018. It worked reasonably well, but what it did do was interpret that technical knowledge into plain English. That's where I think that the advantage of the Good Practice Guidelines, whether it was the 2018 edition or the new 7.0 edition, interprets what is quite a technical element into plain English to assist you to see those subtle differences and give you some negative information that can assist you, one, in operational resilience, and I would suggest organizational resilience as a collective to use some of those good practices and those negative information that can assist you. Yeah, most definitely.
Thank you, Paul. There's a couple of questions for Samita about the refresher course. If there's going to, so the question is if the refresher course is free of charge or not.
Unfortunately, it is not free of charge. To give you an idea, it is a 1-day course. In GBP, it is going to be priced at £525. I don't have the USD and the Euro equivalent, but if we make a note, I'm happy to come back to those who need the USD or Euro pricing with those numbers.
Thank you, Samita. So this one is another question for Paul. Nowadays, there's a lot of talk about integrating business continuity and resilience. Does this new edition also include the resilience bit?
Good question. It does, but it's more subtle in the sense of, whereas the old GPG 2018, you had the life cycle, and then if you look at the life cycle, we used to work in cooperation with other disciplines to build organizational resilience. I think it's more subtle within the GPG 7.0, but ultimately the outcome that we hope to achieve is to work in cooperation with other disciplines to avoid working in silo to build organizational resilience. I think there's still a debate going on, what is organizational resilience, what's operational resilience, and how business continuity fits into that triangulation of information. But certainly I always use the GPG to build organizational resilience, because ultimately we want to be better prepared to deal with disruptions, to respond, recover, etc., and resume, or to try to identify those disruptions before they ripple across the organization to present that big bang event. So I think subtly it does enhance organizational resilience. It may not say it as such. You have to go looking for those keywords of resilience within the GPG per se.
Thank you, Paul. So there's a question for Samita. Will members automatically receive a hard copy of the edition of the GPG 7.0 edition? If not, what is the process?
Unfortunately, the members don't automatically receive a hard copy of the GPG. However, the printed copies of the GPG are available for sale via the BCI website. So you could go onto the shop. There is a special member price, though, for the printed GPG. So for non-members, it is priced at £90, and for members, it is £45. However, members are all eligible to a free downloadable copy of the GPG, which you can access when you log in with your member account.
Perfect, thank you. So there's a lot of questions also about this slide deck for this webinar. So the webinar recording will be available on the BCI website, and we will also upload it on YouTube, so it will be available there. Samita, when it comes to the slides, are we okay to publish the slides as well?
I think so, yes.
Perfect. So the slides will be available with the recording on the BCI website. You'll be able to download them on the page. So there's a question about the CBCI qualification, if it's underpinned or aligned with any university.
No, we have not. It is not a course that has that is off-call regulated or has been accredited. However, it has been developed in a way that it could align with a level 3 qualification within the UK, but that is just an alignment that we have done. It is not accredited at all. It is a BCI's own course.
Thank you, Samita. Sorry, I'm just flicking through. Oh, so there's a question about the competition and we are running. So if you attended the webinar today, you will be entered in a prize draw to win a 50% discount on the upcoming CBCI online. So a question in this regards is when will the winners will be informed? Next week, we just need to pull out the list for both webinars and conduct the prize draw. So next week, we will contact the winners via email. So that answers the question. There's another question for Samita. Can anyone take the exam without attending the course?
No, unfortunately, at the moment, the CBCI 7.0 requires taking a course through an LTP or the CBCI online course. There is a self-study route that has been open for the 2018 exam, but that is a package. So there isn't a route to just simply take an exam. You could do the self-study route, which would include taking the e-learning courses, a mock exam, and then the main exam. The e-learning courses are currently getting upgraded to get them aligned to 7.0. Once they are aligned to GPG 7.0, we would be able to open the self-study route for the CBCI 7.0 exam as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Samita. There's another question for Samita. So there's someone that says, I've downloaded the new material, which I presume is the GPG 7.0. And this person wishes to print the GPG, but is unable to. So I will leave you to answer that, Samita, if the GPG is printable or not.
No, the downloadable GPG is not printable. So if you need a printed copy, you would have to purchase it through the BCI website.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry, we have so many questions. So after you take the one-day refresher course, does the CBCI certification expiring date extend for another 3 years? I think there's a lot of, I'm going to type in the answer at the end so it's clear, because I think there's a lot of confusion between, if you've already taken the CBCI, if you have to retake the exam, and how does it work? So I'll write down the question, but Samita, could you answer this so it's clear for everyone?
Yes, of course. So the CBCI refresher course is only a one-day course. You will get only a certificate of attendance at the end of it. The CBCI certification that you are referring to is something you achieved after you sat the CBCI 2018 exam, or maybe some other previous version of the exam. So you will get a certificate only if you apply to take the CBCI 7.0 exam, which you can apply to if after the refresher course, if you really wanted to take the CBCI 7.0 exam again, which is completely up to you. If you want to recertify yourself, please get in touch with us and we can facilitate that for you. However, it is not mandatory. It will not lead to any extension of any certification or membership that you have.
Thank you, Samita. Sorry, I'm just... So question for Paul. Does the GPG 7.0 cover organizational resilience ISO 65000?
It doesn't per se. It's not been included within what the designers of the GPG. I can't see that it's been included as an ISO standard. It's certainly not been mentioned within the material that they've used to develop some of the professional practices. So I would suggest it's probably been considered somewhere, but it's certainly not been documented as one of the ISO documents that they've actually referred to.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So there's another question for Samita. What is the cost of the one-day refresher course? I don't know if we can say, or it'll be available soon.
Yes, and the cost of the one-day refresher course is 525 GBP. The USD and the Euro prices, I'm sorry, I'm just not able to, so I'm not conversant with the USD and Euro conversion of it. But if we take a note of this question, I'm sure we can get back with the USD and Euro equivalent pricing as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Samita. I'm just going to pick another two questions because we have a minute. So there's someone asking, are you able to confirm the days for the online course? So Samita, I'll let you answer that.
For the CBCI online course, currently we run them on Mondays and Tuesdays in the evening, UK time evening, I mean 3 p.m. to 5 p.m.
Perfect. And the next intake starts on the 11th of March.
That's right.
So just for everyone to know.
The intake has already started for the 11th March course. So if you are interested, please do sign up. But the next course takes off on 11th of March. Yes.
Perfect. Sorry, one more question. So I passed my certification, my CBCI certification in November 2023. Can I retake the CBCI exam in the new version? If so, under what conditions?
That is quite an interesting question. Perhaps I can liaise with the person who's asked this question to understand more directly what their requirement is, considering that they've only just qualified and probably been inducted into the CBCI grade of membership. So Mariana, would we be able to sort of make a note and perhaps go back to them? Perhaps I could get in touch with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I also recommend, because obviously there's a lot of questions and we can't unfortunately answer them all. I would recommend to email them to us and we will get back to you 100%. So if you do have any questions, I'll gather all the information from the questions today. But if you do have any questions, you can also reach us on LinkedIn in the live chat on LinkedIn. We use that. So if you've got any questions about this, please reach out, because we will provide you with an answer. There's a question about one last question about BCI membership application forms. So the question is, when will the BCI membership application forms get updated and aligned with this new 7.0 edition?
I'm aware that it is a piece of work that is currently being done by the membership team. We have only had recent discussions about it, so I'm not able to confirm a date yet, but I can assure you that is very much being done as we speak.
Perfect, thank you. We don't have any more time, but I will download all these questions and we'll try to get back to everyone. I'm going to share the email address in the chat box where you can submit any questions that you have. Or here we go. This is the email, or you can also reach us on LinkedIn. As I said, we're very active on our messaging, so please do reach out to us. Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you so much, Samita.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And if you are interested in the CBCI 7.0 course, please look up the BCI website. Our LTPs are offering it. The course calendar is there. There's lots to pick up from different regions across the world, LTPs and approved instructors with lots and lots of years of experience. Or if you want to do it more on a part-time basis, there's this CBCI online course as well, which runs 2 days a week. So I hope to see a lot of you on these courses, and for any questions, please reach out to us. Thank you.